to interject with questions at any time. I want you to come up with ideas of your own, share your own ideas. I love that interaction. So today we're going to talk about some multicultural considerations for early intervention. Basically, anything that I'm speaking about here can be used in any setting. You have to make these considerations wherever you are, and it should be. As you can tell, this is something that I am passionate about. So also as part of the work that I do at Najisha, I'm a chair of the Multicultural Committee, and we go out to the universities and give talks similar to these with, therapy in different settings and how to be culturally sensitive. And we'll explain that more. So first I wanted to start us off. Ooh, okay. How do you say hi? So if you guys want to say hi in your own way, it doesn't have to necessarily be another language, just the way you say hi. We're quiet tonight, huh? Hello. So you're a hello kind of gal. Um, so depending on oops, sorry. Depending on who you're speaking to, your hello can be different. Um, a lot of times I'm so sorry. I'm trying to get rid of it. This is why I don't open the chat. I open the chat and now it won't go away. All right. Um, So we can say hi in many different ways. As you can tell, these are all different languages, but we say hi also depending on who we're speaking to. So if you're saying hi to a little one, you usually hi, you raise your pitch, you raise your voice, you get down to their level. If I'm saying, hi to my daughter who just called me a few minutes ago, it's like, hey, what's up? What do you want? If you're talking to, my boss who called me prior to that, hello, how are you? How's it going? So we change even something as simple as how we say hi. So just taking that even slightest consideration, who do you greet with a hug? Who do you greet with just a high five, a fist bump, a wave from across the room? So our greetings change depending on who that person's relation is to us, as well as that person's own cultural expectations. So if I'm greeting someone from a similar culture, we usually greet women with a kiss on both cheeks. I'm not going to do that to someone who's not from my culture because maybe it's not as accepted. So remembering, within each culture and your approach with people. So I thought this was cute. It's a picture that I found online of will you receive food in this house, And it shows, Europe into Africa, into Asia, looking into some of these countries. The blue is almost always you will get food from that, that somebody from that region. Um, the red is very unlikely to give food, and then you have the in-betweens. So very often that's a cultural expectation that happens a lot as well, especially when I do evaluations or I work with EI clients. Depending on the culture, sometimes they get insulted if I don't accept food or water or something that they're giving me on the way in or on the way out. And if, you don't accept that, sometimes it can be rude. But sometimes it clashes with your own culture. Maybe you don't want to have whatever they're presenting you with. Maybe you don't want to be insulting, but you can't have it. Um, so there are ways to have these sensitive conversations. I personally, I'm from Egypt, born and raised here. And culturally, we love to feed people. So even in my office at work, everybody knows if they're hungry, they need a snack, they want candy, they want something, they will find it in my room at all times. And that's just the person I am. I can't go to somebody's house without coming with something that I baked or bought if I didn't have time, or some kind of food platter. So these are things that, are part of my culture and part of who I am. So think of that and self-reflect as you go into people's homes, especially with EI, it's very sensitive. We're entering their sacred little realm. And how are you approaching these conversations? So the objectives here, we want to identify and understand what cultural awareness and cultural sensitivity are. These are newer terms that some people may not be familiar with. Um, and we will go through that. To understand what bias is, especially unconscious bias, and how they can impact your service delivery, and to learn simple changes that we can make that have a large impact on client success and make families feel seen. So does anybody, before I go through, do we know why I say that cultural awareness and cultural sensitivity are new terms? Does anybody know what the old terms are? One term in particular, still one that's used on Asha's site a lot, but it is starting to shift.
Cultural competency.
Exactly. Cultural competency. So why do we think that cultural competency is going out the window and not being used as a term anymore? And what is cultural competency? Anyone want to take a stab at it? So when we are competent at something, it's under the assumption that we are now an expert at it, that we know everything about it. And it's not possible to know everything about everybody's culture. Even someone within your own culture, you can't know everything about them because their own life experiences, where they come from, their interactions, everything in their life shapes their own individual culture. So even if you belong within a larger culture, that individualized culture can never be fully known. So to say that we are competent in culture, um, is basically a misnomer. We're stating something that can't be possible. So instead, our objectives are we want to be culturally aware and culturally sensitive. And we'll explain that a little more as we go along. But just keep in mind that these are the newer terms, and using the term of cultural competency is no longer used. And it still is in some contexts, but should not be. So in honor of Black History Month and our change and our thought process here, I love this quote. So the need for change bulldozed the road down the center of my mind. Maya Angelou is one of my favorite poets. I love everything that woman has written. But I love this quote in particular because it really says that every time we need to change, it completely alters your thinking. It alters your mindset. And if it doesn't, then you're not really changing. So you can say you're changing all you want, but if it hasn't actually caused that change within you, it's not going to be reflected in your actions. So what is anybody here work in early intervention?
Yes, I do.
Awesome. Christy, all right.
I
So
have
for
in the
those
past. Oh,
you have in
sorry.
the past, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. You too, sorry. Nice. So that's great because I feel like a lot of people I speak to, they're afraid of early intervention, and I'm like, why? They're so cute. Um, so when I first started, even as a student, I started in the hospital with babies from birth to two, and then with teenagers with traumatic brain injury. So I've loved this little realm. I love the development that happens in such a short time. I love that interaction with families. You actually get to feel like you are a part of that change, and you can see that what you're teaching and what you're instructing is actually being used and altered and continues with the family. So I personally feel like you have that sensitive interaction. And I feel closer to my therapy personally when I do my EI. I still love my school-based and I love my other therapies, but it's very different because I don't always have my families interacting. Sometimes they do. Sometimes you hear from them once a year at a meeting. So that interaction is very important to me. So for those who are not aware, just to remind you, early intervention is services for babies from birth and toddlers up until age 3, and then they are get shifted into the school system if they need to continue therapy. It varies depending on the needs of a child and family, so the types of services that they get, whether it's speech, OT, PT, special instruction, um, ABA therapy, they all differ depending on the individual needs and diagnoses of that child, and depending on the needs of the family. So even if that child, say, we decide needs OT, and the family says it doesn't fit what I want for them, they don't get it. So it is very individualized and very personalized for the family. It has a great impact on the development of the child and their future success as they develop and grow into school and into life. So research has shown that early intervention within those first 3 years of life can make or break a child sometimes. It really can impact their development as they go through. And we've seen it a lot of times, especially at the school system or the older clients as you work with. You see the ones that have had the therapy from when they were little and the ones that got it when they were older, and certain developmental stages have already passed. Um, It is voluntary. So again, it's not required. Parent has the right to say no to any and all parts of the therapy or all of it. They are provided at no cost to families. So this is free therapy, um, which is great because a lot of our families cannot afford it or don't know what it is or don't know the worth of it. And sometimes letting them know that they don't have to pay for it, they're more willing to accept it and try it. Um, and it doesn't put a burden on these families who are sometimes just coming in with a new diagnosis, new disability, trying to learn and navigate their child that they're working with. And it's available and eligible to all children, regardless of race, ethnicity, income level, immigration status, or disability. So key points to EI. Again, the number one thing that we need to remember is that it is family-centered. The family is pivotal in EI intervention. And if you are, sometimes EI does happen in other settings, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But usually it is in the home. It's either in their direct home or in a family member's home. For example, the last client that I had just before this meeting, it's at the great grandmother's house, and that's where she stays throughout the week. So usually it is family. Sometimes you do EI in a child care setting, so in a daycare or an early childhood center. But even when it's there, you need to have some kind of weekly interaction with the family, some kind of engagement, and text messages are no longer considered appropriate. So it does have to be a phone call or a meeting or some kind of personalized interaction, email explaining everything that's happened. Because the whole point of EI is to get this to carry on into everyday life. It should respect the family's diversity and their personal values. It is, like we said, based on the individual child's needs. You need that family interaction again. Even if you're not seeing them directly, you have to find ways to get them to interact with you. And it's naturalistic. So the whole point of it is within that child's environment. We're not coming in with a desk and chairs. We're not requiring that child to sit, which I know happens a lot. Sometimes they need to, but we're not sitting them at a desk and a table and working across from them unless it's something that they specifically need. But most of the time, you're sitting on the floor, you're sitting on a beanbag, you're sitting at the table in the kitchen working with, through food or sitting at the table in the kitchen just working on a game or toy. And it's very natural into their environment of what they should be normally doing if you were not there. And it needs to follow the IFSP, which can be altered as needed. So even if you get an IFSP, and for those who don't know, it's an individualized family service plan, it can be altered as needed, meaning if you get an IFSP and it has certain goals on there and you don't agree with those goals or they've met those goals already and it's not time for the meeting or change yet, or you feel the child needs different goals and you discuss this with the parent, you have the right to change those goals at any time, and to alter the plan as needed and get in touch with the case manager or change it at the next progress reporting. But you do have that right to change it, and so does the parent. They have the right to say that whether or not it's working for their child or if they want to alter any parts of it. Any questions so far? All right. So EI is based on what is called embedded coaching. So embedded coaching is basically the integration of family-centered approaches and evidence-based practice. So you are not just going and playing with the child, which a lot of people think we do. A lot of times, though, it is play-based. But you are using evidence-based practice and best practices within speech therapy, but you're integrating it within that family-centered approach. So you want to see what their routines are in the family, what they work on, what interactions they have, and then you're now putting your evidence-based practice and making it work. It takes place again in natural environments and during regular activities. It follows their daily routines. So I don't know how many of you do this, but sometimes I'll tell the family, I don't always need to sit in that same spot in the living room every time. If that's where you want them to be at that time of day, okay, but we can do it at the park. We can do it in the yard. If you want to go to grandma's house today, I'll meet you at grandma's house and we can do it there. I've met them in the mall and we've walked around the mall or sat at the food court because, one of my parents, that was their goal, was to get their child to be able to eat outside of the home without tantruming and without, being too overly distracted. And so we decided to work on that. So we meet at the mall 1 or 2 sessions a week. Some of them, again, they want them to play with others in the playground and they don't know how to approach that play. And their child is just parallel playing and they want to find out how to get them to interact with others. So I would meet them at the playground, not in this weather, but when it's warmer and nicer outside. Um, and we would interact with the other children there and I would, demonstrate and show the mom how to get that child to interact appropriately with other children. Um, and it gives families the opportunities to practice. So basically, by seeing you do this, you then have to stop and pause. You're not taking care of the whole session like you normally would in a private clinic setting or in a school setting. You are letting the family practice. So you're supposed to step back and let the parent now try out what you just did. So say we worked on a certain prompt and it worked really well with that child. Now you're supposed to step back and let the parent do it. So a lot of times, again, that multicultural consideration, is the parent able to do that prompt? Do they speak English? Do they understand what you're trying to explain? Are you explaining it in certain language? So again, we're going to get into some of these things. And it also takes in the strengths and weaknesses of a child and family. So again, not every family has a dynamic setting. Sometimes, like I said, I have a child who's with their great grandparent, and staying there and does not see mom on a regular basis, except for on the weekends. I have another student that's, dad is home with them during the day, and mom is at night, and then dad goes to work and they alter that way. We have to take into account their individual schedules, their changes, what works for that family and what might not work for that family. It's not always what you think should work. And that's why you have to have those conversations. So after each session or every other session, or however many times you feel necessary, you need to stop and ask the family, okay, is this working? What would you like to change? What specific goals do you have? What do you want to work on? What do you think the child needs to improve on now? And by doing that and doing that reflection with the parent, you're giving them a better opportunity to, again, have this carry over and have your therapy be effective. So we get into culture. So what is culture? There are a set of factors from multiple dimensions that can describe how a person or a group of people experiences life and engage in their daily practices. So that's the definition. Um, but culture really is a mix of everything. So it's our ethnicity, our nation, our language, our beliefs, our society that we live in, our behaviors in certain settings and with certain people, our history of our culture and how that's impacted us. So by looking at that, we're also looking at religion, values, customs, language and or languages that are spoken in the home or that the child is interacting with, dialects, different dialects that are being used. And I love a lot of times people are like, oh, well, they only speak English, but English has so many dialects. Where are they from? Are they from New York? Are they from Georgia? Are they from Boston? Where did they originate? Are they from another country and moved here? How is that impacting their beliefs and their culture? The art that they use on the wall, the way that they sit. For some people, I sit on the floor and do therapy, and some people don't want to, and they think that's inappropriate, and they want to sit at a table or a couch, and they think their child sitting on the floor is disrespectful or rude when a teacher is in the house, as they call me, or as the therapist is in the home. So again, taking that into account and not being insulted when they go against what you want to do or what you think is appropriate, but being accepting of that as well. So when we look at culture, there's what we call surface culture, which are the things that we can see. So that's the food, the language, the flags that are hung, festivals we go to, our fashion that we wear, holidays we celebrate, the music that we listen to, performance, literature, games, all of those things that are visual. So you see me, you see I have a scarf on my head. It might be some kind of cultural religion. For me, it's religion. And it is culture as well. But looking at sometimes there are these surface things that we can see immediately and understand and know. And sometimes there are so many more things. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen this iceberg analogy for stuttering, and we see like the surface, what's going on, and then what's really going on when they stutter. So this is the same thing with culture. There's the things that you see, and then there's so much more. So the styles and rules for communication. So facial expressions, hand gestures. Sometimes a peace sign can be, in the US, peace sign is peace, it's a happy sign. In other cultures, that can be very insulting. It can be rude. Giving a thumbs up. So again, my family is Egyptian. If you give a thumbs up in this country, that means, okay, it's great. If I give a thumbs up in Egypt, it's more like sort of like an FU. It's not really appropriate and not really accepted. And usually when you do that, you're being pretty sarcastic or not really polite. Um, so knowing when you're in certain settings, is that appropriate? Is my eye contact too much or is it enough? Knowing your social communications and your conversational patterns in certain social concepts. Knowing manners and courtesy. Some places, some cultures, it's extra courteous. You have to say thank you several times. Um, in some places, saying thank you too many times is considered rude. Um, Concepts of yourself, time, your roles related to age, sex, class, family, etc. So again, depending on how your own personal, oops, I'm sorry, how, I went all the way back. Depending on how you're culturally your own cultural experience, it will show how you will interact with others. How, like I said, how you even say hi in the beginning to how you interact. How do you treat your elders? In certain cultures, elders are considered highly respected, and there's a very different greeting that should be said to elders as opposed to someone younger. So, like I said, that little girl that I work with who has her great grandmother there, I automatically, greet her very differently than I would someone who's younger, who moves faster, there's certain things I will show her to do that I know she can, and some things I know she can't. So I will not show her those examples, especially since I know she is with the child most of the time. So having that, understanding and respect towards the differences that are there. And again, it's our attitudes towards different ages, animals in the house. Um, I know so many times, especially people who have pets. I have cats right now, but I've had every pet you can ever think of. Um, and people who have pets are usually very tied to their pets. If you're allergic to a pet, you can't really tell that person they can't have that pet there. It's something you can suggest, but that pet belongs in that family unit and belongs there more than you do. So that's something you need to interact and ask them. Is it okay if when I'm here because I'm allergic, or maybe you can't see that child at all, because that pet is just everywhere in the house and will always be. Um, so these are things that we need to culturally look at and respect within the homes that we go into. Cultural humility is the understanding that you have to start with a personal examination of your own beliefs and cultural identities to better understand the beliefs and cultural identities of other. So it's a lifelong process of self-reflection. And what does that mean? If you're not comfortable and don't understand your own culture, you can't begin to understand and accept or understand the impact of cultures from other people. Um, and this is something that actually took me a while to understand as well. I was born and raised in this country, as I said, and I felt like I was very immersed in the culture and I was very accepting of my own culture and proud of my culture. But then I realized that at work, I am the person, and those who've heard me talk before, I do bring this up. So I'm the person that at work, I decorate the suite for every holiday. So we have the child study suite and I decorate, I just decorated for Valentine's, I decorate for the holidays, I'll put up Kwanzaa decorations and Christmas and Hanukkah and everything. And, St. Patrick's I'll put up and spring I'll put up, every holiday you can think of. Chinese New Year, it was all red with, snakes everywhere for the new year. But I realized that, again, 16 years in the same school, it wasn't until maybe the past 7 or 8 years, not even, that I started decorating for my own holidays. Because as proud as I was of myself, I felt awkward sharing that with others, especially since I knew I was such a minority. So it wasn't until I finally, believe it or not, my admin was the one who was like, "You decorate for everything. Why aren't you decorating for your own?" Um, and I realized, I hadn't even realized that I was doing that, but I started changing. And now when you become more accepting of your own culture, it allows other people to ask more questions and become more accepting as well. So we just celebrated, it was Muslim Heritage Month in the state of New Jersey, not New York. So as I said, I work in New Jersey. And for Muslim Heritage Month, we ended up doing a whole week of activities. So we did henna tattoos and we did, wearing a scarf for a day, and we did a whole bunch of different things that normally I would have felt awkward trying. but my staff absolutely loved, the students loved, they started asking questions, and people started bringing up other cultural things that they wanted to do throughout the school. And we are already planning the next one for Dominican Day, as you're saying, and for other things. So when you become accepting of your own cultural self, it allows you to open up your mind to other people's cultures as well. Does anybody have anything they want to share, or anything that they've done or felt? I know it's a Friday night and it's been a long week, I'm sure. All right. So
Kudos
moving
to you for
on.
recognizing yourself and celebrating yourself. Kudos
Thank
to you.
Yeah. And it took a long time. It's hard. It's hard when you're the minority and you stand out. Sometimes you just want to, fit in or just meld with everybody else. Um, but it is important. And like I said, once you do that, it allows other people to feel the same and you empower others. So with cultural responsiveness, this is now the outward reflection. So we're looking at the ability to recognize and respond to needs, experiences, and cultural backgrounds of other individuals. Providing care that's linguistically and culturally appropriate, such as using interpreters, simple language. A lot of times we tend to use, therapy language, we use higher vocabulary concepts, and we have to take into account that some people just don't understand that, either due to education differences or differences in culture or translation of things that don't translate well. Be very careful using translation apps. Google Translate is not always your best friend. And sometimes it can translate things very inappropriately. So if you can, try to get somebody who is from that culture or look up on several resources how to translate certain things before you try to use it with a parent or family. Learn about your clients and their families. So get to know their individual backgrounds and needs. Ask them questions about where they're from, what they enjoy, what do they do on the weekends. It will help you to shape your therapy and to shape your interactions with them as well. You want to use student and client vocabulary. So again, presenting new concepts using words that your students already know or are exposed to. So as we know, a lot of the things that we use are very biased. A lot of the materials, um, it has language in there that maybe kids are not exposed to. There are pictures of, fireplaces or farms or, um, things that certain children don't see or don't know of. And it doesn't make them less than. And that's something that we have to take into account. A lot of times people are like, oh, they don't know that because, and it's like, no, they just weren't exposed, but they were exposed to this whole level of vocabulary and language in these areas that maybe you weren't. So let's take into account that vocabulary that they may have been exposed to more, and let's use it within our therapy and our approaches. So the culturally aware clinician has the ability to simultaneously culture patterns and individual variations. We can engage in cultural self-scrutiny. So again, that self-reflection to assess our own cultural biases and how they can impact and improve self-awareness. We can utilize evidence-based practice to include client, patient, and family characteristics, clinician expertise, and empirical evidence in clinical decisions. And we can understand the communication context and needs of clients and patients and their families by looking at the communication disorders within that social context. So not just looking at their overall culture, but looking at how it impacts them socially and within their home environment that you're working with. You also have to look at the variations of culture between, again, certain family members. Is that child with a babysitter who may be of a different culture than the family? Um, how are we interacting with everybody that is involved with that client, with that child that you're working with? By looking at our cultural biases, we all want to say that we are not biased and we have no bias towards anybody, and that is the goal. But let's be honest, everybody has bias. No matter how hard you try, you will always have that bias within you. And it's basically looking at how is it impacting. And we're going to talk about that a little more. So when you have culturally responsive care, respectful care and interactions can occur. You recognize what you don't know and are open to learning as much as you can. You can learn and grow from people whose beliefs, values, and worldviews differ from your own. And care is provided with the patient's experiences and concerns in mind. So you're looking at that individual child That is why it's called an IFSP. It's an individualized family service plan. One of the biggest differences with EI as opposed to any other kind of therapy, you are doing therapy with that family unit. Well, however that family unit is made up, but you are working with that family unit, not just with that child. So the bias that we're talking about, there are so many different types of bias, but we're not going to go into all of them. The one that we're going to focus on the most is unconscious bias. So this is the inclinations, attitudes, or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions that form outside of our own conscious awareness. So, we see that little old grandma looking person walking, down the street, and we assume they're all sweet and nice and kind, and they could be the meanest lady you've ever met. But we have that bias automatically once we see that person and we assume they're okay. So unconscious bias, believe it or not, can be a good thing. So if you're walking down that same street and somebody looks a little creepy to you and maybe you don't get that good vibe and you're feeling a little dangerous, walking down that street by yourself, that unconscious bias gets you to be more alert, gets you to walk a little faster, maybe go into a business or something to keep yourself safe. However, at the same time, we have to realize that these stereotypes, when we stereotype certain people, we see somebody with a hoodie or we see somebody with, a certain outfit on, and we automatically assume that's when unconscious bias becomes a stereotype and can become dangerous. And we have to be careful with these biases and how they impact us. Again, that self-reflection, that self-scrutiny, looking at the biases that you've grown up with, that you've been impacted with, that you maybe your coworkers share or people that you interact with, and those unconscious biases can start taking over. So again, we want to keep on to the correct cultural, unconscious biases that save us and protect us and keep us moving in a quick pace. But we want to also be careful when it starts becoming a stereotype or makes the wrong decisions about people and the automatic wrong biases. And we'll come up with that. Does anybody want to share like an unconscious bias that they either have or that people have had towards them and how it's impacted?
As a mother of a teen son, I'm very nervous of the hoodie and him walking with the hoodie, and I have to remind him not to always be with a crowd or things that my fear. I don't want to project it on him, but I know that unconscious bias that someone may have towards him. And he's now already 6 feet. He's only 14 years old. You know how he has to act accordingly, or I guess that's what I'm thinking of with when I think of that.
Right, and it's scary. It absolutely is. Um, and unfortunately, these are things that we have to think of. But like you said, we don't want to reflect it on that child because we don't want them going through life in fear either.
Exactly.
But we do need them to be cautious.
Yeah.
Um, I agree. I agree. Anyone else?
Well,
Uh,
I've had a experience actually that happened to me. I didn't think too much of it, but
Hmm.
there is a stereotype that Black women are somehow angry. Where
Yes.
when I first started working, my supervisor sent me to a workshop, and the other clinicians there came to her and they were so surprised. They were like, "Oh my God, Ayodele is so nice. She's so lovely." And my supervisor was like, "Who do you think I'm hiring?" So it was, I didn't pick up on it so much because I was a very young woman at the time. But that's why they said that, because I'm Black and they thought it was just remarkable that I wasn't some mean, angry woman.
Yeah. And I say that because I've seen it happen with my African American colleagues. I've had it happen to myself in a different way. So I've had, I do wear a headscarf. Like I said, I was born and raised here, but before I speak, I get that automatic assumption. People start talking really slow. And I didn't start wearing the headscarf until I was in my 20s, but I didn't realize why people were talking slow. I was like, oh my God, they don't think I could speak English. Um, or they automatically assume you're uneducated. And when they see the doctor, they're like, how, Um, so, unfortunately, those biases come in. They're like, what do you mean? I thought you weren't allowed to be educated. So unfortunately, it hits a lot of different ways, right?
I would like to share. I do home visits in EI,
Mhm.
and I have to be conscious of my personal body going into other people's homes. I'm a
Hmm.
taller lady, I'm a bigger bodied lady, and I'm a Black lady. So
Hmm.
sometimes I have to keep in mind that this little 2-year-old child may not have ever seen anybody who looks like me. So I've been told that I can be, quote, intimidating, but sometimes it can be physical and also on the same note on an intellectual level too. They're like, what, you know?
Yeah,
So definitely that.
absolutely. And you brought up a really
Same,
important
same,
point.
same,
So
same.
kids don't know who they don't know. And a lot of times, a lot of these little ones that were going into their homes, some of them have never left their home except for the doctor's appointments. They haven't been exposed to other people or to different people or different races. So we have to realize that sometimes, and especially from a child, if the parent's looking at you differently, sometimes it's, other biases coming in. But from a child, sometimes it's just you're new, you're novel, you're different to them. So not taking it personally when they look at you sideways or look at you differently, or maybe are afraid a little bit when they first see you. Um, and getting that understanding in yourself that sometimes it's just because you look different to them. Anyone else? Thank you for sharing.
I just wanted to add when I first started working in the college,
Hmm.
people thought I was a thief, looking in my bag to see if I stole something. Oh my God, it just angered me so.
That is horrible.
Yeah,
I'm sorry you dealt with that.
yeah. But that's what they
And
say, being African American, they have that stigma, thinking no matter, it what degree or what profession you have, they still see you as that.
unfortunately, but we have to just keep educating, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And it's disheartening because, we feel like we've come so far in some ways, and in other ways we're taking, several steps back. But the biggest thing we have to think about is we don't want it to change us and who we are. So you just keep being you, keep representing, and hopefully people get the hint that, stereotypes are dangerous.
absolutely.
Anyone else like to share? All right. So with these unconscious biases, again, we have to look at the impact that it can have um, from us and from the people that we interact with. So as you saw from the examples people were bringing up, sometimes it's our own unconscious bias that impacts our therapy, and sometimes it's the biases people have towards us, and how comfortable we can be with that. So a bias that I always hit, again, with the scarf on my head, and a lot of times kids have never been exposed to it. They don't know, they don't understand. And so sometimes they just are really distracted by the scarf. That is actually why I started wrapping my scarf from behind like this, because as a student, I realized that when I wrapped it the traditional way, a lot of kids wanted to grab it or play with it or were just so distracted. So when I go to work, usually I wrap it this way, and on the weekends, you'll see me just wrap it typically. Um, but I've had to alter sort of my personality or who I am based on different settings for that reason. Um, and then it got to the point where, sometimes if I wrap it the other way and go to work, people do a double take and they'll actually, believe it or not, my second or third year at work, I was stopped by my own security guard who had seen me for 2 years straight every day, stopped at the door because, they didn't realize who I was because I wrapped it differently. So again, in the beginning, I used to get upset. I used to take it personally. I used to get offended. And then when you become more open to it and understanding and realize that sometimes people have bad intentions and sometimes they really just aren't aware, um, and allowing yourself to get comfortable. My favorite phrase that I love using is get comfortable being uncomfortable. Because when you are uncomfortable, you change, you alter your thinking, and you are developing and growing. So when you put yourself in some of these uncomfortable situations, it lets you learn how you can handle them, and it lets you grow as a person and as a therapist. So, ableism, this is a newer term that has come out a lot, and some people don't understand it, so I put it in here. So, ableism, if you look at the photo on the bottom, it's, somebody can have an equivalent CV, an equivalent resume, and we judge people differently than we judge others. So even though a resume could be equivalent for two people, but the one in the wheelchair or the one that is black or the one that, has a scarf on her head or whatever looks different than the norm that we accept, is suddenly less qualified. And we look at them differently. And it's having that prejudice against somebody thinking that whoever doesn't have a disability or doesn't have a difference, um, is better automatically. So telling someone, but you don't look like you have a disability. So, the person that's struggling with ADD or that's struggling with bipolar, struggling with anything, or even just looks different, like I said, from the norm, telling them, but you don't look X. Um, and sometimes, like you were saying with that example before, they see, a black woman and they automatically assume, oh, you must be this way, you must be a little less educated, you must be, and I've had that experience as well. Um, and telling them, oh, but you don't look XYZ, or I didn't think XYZ. And unfortunately, it's something that is dealt with a lot. On the other hand, similar to it, but not as visual, is mentalism. So this is a favoritism of those who are neurotypical over those who are neurodivergent, um, labeling clients as high or low functioning, separating students based on perceived mental ability. And again, this can happen among colleagues or with clients. Um, Having that automatic assumption that, I like working with this kid because they're easier automatically once you see a diagnosis or once you see something written in their description and you make assumptions. So linguistic diversity, when we talk about linguistic diversity, we're looking at the vocabulary that is being used, dialects again that are being used. Sometimes even within another language, there are different dialects. As we said in English, there are several dialects. So looking at how that impacts, looking at their literacy level. Literacy level, when I say, of course, these are pretty linguistic, we're looking at little kids that are, just learning, but looking at the linguistic level of the families that you're dealing with. So again, what vocabulary are you pulling in? Is it something they're exposed to? Is it something that they can use and understand and will carry on? And looking at family preferences regarding their linguistic use. So are you trying to teach a child to say a phrase that maybe the parents don't use typically, or um, and that's why I say something as simple as hi. In some families, maybe they speak another language and, they only want to say it in Spanish. So they only want to say hola. And that's more important to them to teaching the child to say that rather than hi, which is not going to be used in the home. Learning how to say, how to greet certain people in the family. So, sometimes we want to teach them to say grandma, but maybe they go by Nana, maybe they go by Tita, maybe they go by something else. So there are different names, different phrases, different things that the family has a preference to. So asking before you assume. Um, we all know what happens when you assume. We make a lot of mistakes. And we want to make sure that we're looking at the family preference of what they want and what they prefer. And then again, when you do this, not only are you becoming more culturally sensitive and more sensitive in general to that family, but you're going to have better results and better carryover. They're going to be much more highly motivated to use the language that they prefer than what you're trying to give them. So some considerations that we want to make, the types of food that we use during therapy. Um, so I worked with a child with CP. We were doing feeding therapy, and he came from Afghanistan. And, we finally got up to using some, mixed chop consistency. And I was so excited. I'm like, we're going to try this, we're going to try that. And, I was giving him the chicken and things from the school lunch. Um, and he was refusing completely. And I know physically he can handle these consistencies, and we've tried it and it worked. Why is he constantly refusing? Again, taking that step back, reflecting, looking at the whole client, looking at the whole child. Um, I realized that, he's from Afghanistan. He's not used to bland food, and I'm keep trying to give him bland food. So the next day I came in with some allspice and I added it onto his food. And when I say that child devoured the entire thing, and was actually eating too fast, I had to start pacing him. So looking at the types of foods that you're exposing children to, sometimes they like spicy food. Even looking at your EI clients, I know that, one of my clients, they told me that, we were working on milk and the kid just wasn't taking it. And I realized they were Puerto Rican and they tend to put a little bit of spice. in their milk before they give it to the child. Asking them, again, finding out what kind of foods they eat or don't eat, and being culturally respectful of the types of foods. Are they vegetarian and you're trying to feed their child meat? It's not going to happen. Are they, do they not eat pork? Do they not eat fish? Do they, whatever it is, in a Hindu home, are you trying to, again, feed them beef? Looking at those differences and what you're trying to expect that child to eat and looking at, variations within their culture as well and how it impacts the materials that you're bringing in, and we'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. So I have my little gnome, and I brought him in because I needed to show you guys, because this apparently was like the biggest deal when I bought him last year. Um, and I didn't realize. So again, I work in an urban school district. Most of my students are Hispanic, so they're various shades of brown. And I have a brown gnome. And when I bought him, I thought it was adorable that it was a brown gnome. And I have an obsession with gnomes in general. So I got it, didn't think twice of it, and I put him out as part of the decoration in our suite. So many kids and so many staff members came to tell me how much of a difference that made, that I actually included something different, and they appreciated that I constantly was pulling in things from different cultures. Something as simple as that, when you're going into a person's home and using different materials, looking at how it does it reflect that child? Is it something they see themselves in? Is it something that they want to play with, that they want to be involved with? Is it something that's familiar to them? And at the same time, even if the child is completely oblivious and doesn't understand that the family does. They do notice, they see it, they understand it, and it's respectful to them as well. Wearing shoes in the home. So coming into people's homes, sometimes you may not feel comfortable taking off your shoes, especially in different settings. I can be honest and say that there are certain homes that I've gone into that I personally didn't want to take off my shoes. But in my own home, shoes stop at the door, they don't come in. It is disrespectful in certain cultures to come in with shoes. And in other cultures, they don't want you to take off your shoes and they think that's rude to be barefoot, or to be in your socks in their home. So they want you to wear. So again, asking them what is appropriate. Something as simple as that on your first entry into the home. Where to leave your therapy bag or jacket. Sometimes you may just want to put it on the side of the couch. Sometimes they don't want it there. That could be their own personal space, their own area. They don't want different scents. They don't want different things there. Maybe they have allergies, other things we need to be cautious of. But at the same time, sometimes we need to think that culturally there's an impact as well. So, I personally, when I go to a home, I put the therapy bag on the floor because, usually I'm sitting on the floor with the child and I want them to be able to reach it and see it and look into it. But, in certain homes, like if I were to go into an Asian home, that's actually very disrespectful and bad luck to put a bag onto the floor. And there's actually a proverb, a purse on the floor is money out the door. And they feel that you're bringing bad luck to their home by doing something like that. So are you considering these differences? Um, what kind of foods are you using again during therapy or giving as a present? Or what are you accepting as a present? Um, what are we looking at the differences in culture and maybe not being insulted? I've had people gift me a bottle of wine and I don't drink, but again, I used to be insulted and then I realized I was like, well, they don't know that I don't drink. We didn't have that conversation. So who am I to assume maybe that's something that's very, you know, important in their culture and important to them. So looking at those things as well. And like I said, not taking things personally and stopping back and reflecting why and how. And then being mindful of holidays. So my take on holidays is always celebrate all or celebrate none. So don't pick and choose. Don't just celebrate the ones that you celebrate. Um, look at what holidays are being celebrated in the home and, make your materials match that. So if you're working on a craft, if you're working on something that's different, is it reflective of everybody's culture and we're just being culturally accepting of everyone? Is it being culturally acceptive of that family and specifically? Plus, we have to also look at how holidays can impact that family and their schedule. So for example, in March, coming up is Ramadan. For those that don't know, Muslim people celebrate that month by fasting from sunrise to sunset. Are you trying to schedule your therapy at sunset time? Do you normally come around that time? Can you shift it during that month? is that something you need to take into account? Because around that time, the family has been fasting all day, and the last thing they want to do is sit with you and do therapy. They want to go and eat. So are we looking at that? Are we looking also in EI, you're not paying attention to that because children that young are not fasting. But again, the members in the house that are fasting or in other clinical settings, that child, if they are fasting, is usually exhausted by the end of the day, or so is the parent. So they're not as willing to have you there to interact with you. Maybe they're going to be a little cranky. I know personally when I fast, I go through a little bit of caffeine withdrawal the first few days. Can't have my coffee. So, sometimes those are things that we need to look into. So is that person being, a little snippy with me because of that, or is it something else? And not automatically, like I said, taking everything personally. Um, looking at certain holidays for certain people, even though it's not your holiday, it may be somebody else's. So not going to their home on those days or scheduling on those days, as it may be considered as disrespectful to them. So materials. The questions you need to ask yourself, is it something the client would have been exposed to? What limitations do my materials have? Are tests and materials that I use biased, as we spoke of before? How does my own cultural and experience impact the therapy materials that I am choosing? And sometimes we have to look at, am I being too culturally sensitive? So believe it or not, this is something that happens a lot when people, they make that effort and it comes from a good place and they want to be culturally sensitive. So for example, say I have a Black client and I want to, all of my therapy materials suddenly became Black, my Black dolls and my Black AAC and my Black this. And sometimes it can be seen as too much and insulting. And why are you going so far out of the way? And now it becomes awkward. So we want to be sensitive, but we don't want to be oversensitive. Um, so these are pictures of some of the therapy materials that I use. So some included are, different types of books, different AEC. As you can tell with my boards, I tend to use all different shades, all different colors on a board. If I'm making it family specific, then yes, I will use a certain color or culture. But if it's a general board that I'm trialing, I leave it open to all. Um, I try to use books that have pictures again that the child might be exposed to, that have hairstyles that the child might be exposed to, even something as simple as a game of Chutes and Ladders. The newer versions of games are trying to be a little more diverse. So just looking at the characters that are on there, we have, different colors and shades and types of people. The Snowy Day is still one of my favorite books forever. And again, just letting that child see themselves reflected in a character. Liam's first cut. So I had the pleasure of presenting with Tay Jones, Shantae. She is amazing. And this was one of her books, her first book, I believe, that she came out with. And it's of an African American boy who also has autism and getting his first haircut. And the experience that I've had with, children or even the parents saying, wow, there's a child of a color or there's a child with autism reflected in a book. Again, same thing, Asian, looking at different views and different cultures, dolls that are of different colors. Barbie has actually started to become very inclusive with a lot of their dolls. So this is one that has a cochlear, or sorry, has a hearing aid. There is a new one that has a cochlear implant. Um, there are different shades of Barbie now. There are different sizes and types. Um, so again, this is something that I brought up because I loved it, but for those who don't know me, I had and I say had because it's now gone. My student hijacked it. But I had an African American Barbie that was dressed in a really cute outfit, but she was in a wheelchair. And there is a student in my school that is African American and in a wheelchair. She's actually not one of my students. She doesn't get speech. But when she saw that doll, again, seeing herself reflected, and just the fact that that doll was wearing a cute outfit, 'cause she was like, I'd seen dolls in wheelchairs before, but they're always wearing these old, raggedy looking outfits and things. And she was like, this girl's wearing something I would wear. And she just loved that doll so much, I let her take it home. But making sure that your materials reflect students, let them see themselves, let the family see themselves, and let them know that you're making that effort. So overall, to reflect on what we spoke about, the steps to improving our cultural awareness and sensitivity, that self-reflection, again, very important. Learning about your client's individual culture and the impacts on therapy. Get out of your comfort zone. Like I said, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Go to restaurants or festivals from another culture, from the culture of your clients, and immerse yourself a little bit in that culture. Invite people to your home or go to homes of people from other cultures. Experience a concert or listen to music or get an audiobook or a book from that culture and learn about it a little bit. And don't be afraid to ask questions. As long as you're polite and respectful in your questions, you're trying to learn about those people and about their culture and about how it can impact and what they want from you as a therapist. And by doing that, you're showing that you're being respectful of their thoughts and their and what they want out of that therapy. Any questions?